She still had the voice note saved. The one from the night he made her feel like the most chosen woman alive. The one where his voice cracked just slightly when he said her name, Esther, like it was something sacred, like saying it too loud might break it. She plays it sometimes, even now, even after everything. And every single time, her chest does that same stupid thing where it tightens and softens in the same breath. But we're not starting there, because that's not where the story begins. The story begins on a Tuesday in October, 3 years earlier, under a mango tree on the edge of the campus fellowship ground, where two people who had no business falling that deeply in love went ahead and did it anyway. Esther Adaeze Okafor was, by every reasonable measure, the kind of girl people described as too serious for her own good. And she wore that description like a badge because she'd worked too hard for anyone to mistake her focus for arrogance. Second year, biochemistry, full scholarship, the kind of grades that made lecturers nod with something close to genuine respect. She was the girl who showed up to 8 a.m. practicals fully prepared, who highlighted her textbooks in 3 different colors because yellow was for facts, pink was for processes, and blue was for things that were likely to appear in exams. She had a plan, she had a timeline, and love, real, messy, knock you sideways love, was firmly placed somewhere after her master's. Then Daniel walked into her study group. Daniel Chukwuemeka Eze was the kind of man who made you feel like the most important person in any room he entered. Not because he was performing it, but because he was genuinely, devastatingly present. He looked at you when you talked. He remembered things, small things, the kind of details that told you he'd been paying attention, even when you thought no one was. He was in his final year of engineering, handsome in that quietly confident way that doesn't announce itself, the kind of handsome that sneaks up on you at an angle. And Esther noticed him the way you notice a crack in a window. Not immediately, but steadily, and then all at once. Their first real conversation lasted 4 hours, and she missed dinner because of it, and she didn't even care. And that should have been her first warning. They fell in love the way good things fall, slowly, then completely. Late-night phone calls that started with homework questions and ended at 2 in the morning with his voice low and warm saying, "I don't actually want to hang up," and her lying in the dark of her hostel room, smiling up at the ceiling like it had personally done her a favor. He called her his person, and she believed him, because why wouldn't she? He said it like he meant it, and back then, back when everything was still clean and untouched, he probably did. "You're the reason I'm pushing, E," he told her one night during the week of his final exams, his voice carrying that particular exhaustion that sounds like honesty. "Every time I want to give up, I think about where I'm going and I think about you being there at the end of it, and I get up again." She saved that voice note too. She turned down Emeka, who was tall and had a car and genuinely liked her. She turned down Praise, who was funny and kind and brought her chin-chin from his mother's shop with absolutely no ulterior motive, which in university was practically a marriage proposal. When her roommate Chidima raised an eyebrow and said, "Esther, are you sure this Daniel is real?" Esther just smiled and said, "I have someone," with the quiet certainty of a woman who has no reason to doubt her ground. She had no reason. That was the problem. The oath happened on a Friday evening, spontaneous and perfect, the way only genuinely important things can be. No plan, no audience, just the two of them under a fading orange sky, Daniel's graduation just weeks away, and the future stretching out before them like something they could actually touch. He took her hand, looked at her with those steady eyes, and said, "I'm not going to leave you behind, Esther. Whatever happens after school, wherever NYSC takes me, I'm coming back for you. I'm choosing you. You hear me? I'm choosing you." And she looked back at him and she said, "I'm choosing you too." No ring, no witnesses, no ceremony. Just two voices in the evening air, and a promise that felt more real than anything she'd ever signed. It felt sacred. God, it felt so sacred. He really genuinely meant it. That's what makes everything that comes next so absolutely unbearable. They said distance was just geography. And maybe for some people that's true. And maybe for some people, love is strong enough to survive 200 kilometers and a new city and a whole new version of yourself. But nobody tells you about the version problem. The part where someone goes away and the city slowly, quietly builds them into someone their partner back home wouldn't fully recognize. Daniel was posted to Lagos. Lagos, the city that doesn't ask who you were before, it only asks what you're becoming. The first 2 months were fine. Better than fine, actually. He called every evening, sent her money when she complained that the department's printing costs were bleeding her dry, and she sent him jollof rice in a cooler via a family friend's driver and told him not to let the driver eat any of it, which the driver absolutely did, eating a full third of it somewhere around Sagamo. Daniel called her laughing and said, the man delivered a crime scene. And she laughed so hard she fell off her bed, and everything was still exactly what it was supposed to be. Then the call started shifting. Not stopping, not yet, just shifting, the way a house settles before a crack appears, so slowly that you keep telling yourself it's nothing, it's just the season, it's just work, it's just adjustment. I'm tired tonight, let me call you tomorrow. My lodge mates are loud, let me text you. I was in an event, I'll explain later. He always said later. Later never came with a full explanation. Her name was Erica Oyelaran, and she arrived in this story the way certain people arrive in your life, without announcement, without warning, slipping in through a side door that someone forgot to close. She was a Lagos girl, born and raised, the kind that comes with certain textures. Lekki apartment, good skin, an MBA in progress, a father with a construction company, and a mother who sat on 3 NGO boards and knew everybody was knowing. She met Daniel at a youth corps mixer event in Victoria Island. His lodge mate dragged him there against his better judgment, and Erica was standing near the drinks table looking unimpressed by everything around her. And he walked up and said something that made her laugh, and that was that. And this is the part that makes it complicated. She wasn't a bad person. Erica wasn't villainous. She didn't know about Esther. She wasn't plotting anything. She just liked him, and he let her. He didn't tell Esther about Erica. He didn't stop talking to Esther either. He sat in the exact middle, in that comfortable, ambiguous space where a man who knows he's wrong can avoid becoming a man who has to admit it. And he stayed there for months, 4 months, sending Esther, I miss you at 11 p.m. and sending Erica good morning texts at 7 a.m. with a coffee emoji like some kind of telecommunications acrobat. He told Esther that NYSC was overwhelming, that he needed space to focus, that she should trust the foundation they built. And she did, because she was that kind of woman, the kind who takes love seriously enough to give it room to breathe. She gave it room. He used the room to start a second life. Esther's friend Chidima was the first person to notice the way Esther's eyes had started carrying something extra. Not sadness exactly, not yet, more like the specific weight of a person who keeps reassuring themselves about something. Have you spoken to Daniel this week? Chidima asked one Thursday evening as they walked back from the library. He's been busy, Esther said. You always say that, because it's always true. Chidima stopped walking and looked at her friend for a long moment with the expression of someone who has seen this particular film before and knows exactly how the third act goes. Then she pressed her lips together, said nothing, and kept walking. She should have said something, but she didn't, and that choice would matter later. Meanwhile, Daniel in Lagos was genuinely thriving. Erica's father's company had an opening for a graduate trainee in the technical department, and she mentioned it to her father on Sunday lunch. Casually, the way you mention rain when it's coming, nothing dramatic, and her father made a call, and 2 weeks later, Daniel had an interview, and 2 weeks after that, he had a job offer that was better than anything he'd been projecting for himself. He didn't tell Esther about the job the normal way. He posted it on his WhatsApp status, a picture of a congratulatory letter captioned, "Only up." And when Esther saw it and called to congratulate him, he was warm and happy and said, "God is faithful, eh?" And she said, "I'm so proud of you." And she meant it fully with all of her heart, not knowing that the very opportunity he was celebrating had come through the hands of the woman who was currently sleeping in his bed. Life is truly, genuinely terrible sometimes. Esther's grades collapsed in the second semester of 200 level, and she watched it happen the way you watch a slow puncture on a tire. She could see the pressure dropping, she knew it was happening, and she couldn't stop it. She'd always been the girl who read ahead, who attended every class, who treated academia like it owed her something and she intended to collect. But now she'd sit in lectures, and the words from the front of the room would arrive at her ears and just fail to enter, like they were knocking on a door that nobody was answering from the inside. She submitted a practical report 3 days late for the first time in her university life, and her supervisor looked at her with something between disappointment and curiosity and said, "This isn't your standard, Miss Okofo." And she said, "I know, sir, it won't happen again," and walked out of the office and sat down on the staircase outside and stared at the wall for 11 minutes. She counted. 11 minutes of just nothing. She told Chindima, because Chindima was her person, her safe place, the person who knew every chapter. And Chindima listened, she really did. For the first few weeks, she listened with full presence and rubbed Esther's back and said the right things. But here is the cruel arithmetic of other people's grief. It is heavy to carry someone else's weight indefinitely. And Chindima had her own tests, her own family drama, her own small crises. And slowly, the way rivers change course without announcement, the conversations got shorter, the responses got more delayed, and one day Esther noticed she'd sent a message at 10 p.m. and it was now known the next day, and it said, "Seen," and nothing else. She was alone now, the particular kind of alone that lives inside crowds, sitting in dining halls full of people, walking through bustling corridors, attending Sunday service and singing along, alone in the way that only happens when the people who were supposed to be there have quietly, gently begun to stop being there. She started lying to her parents because the truth would cost them too much. Her mother was managing a back problem and her father had just taken a loan to fix the family car. And the last thing either of them needed was to hear that their brilliant daughter, the scholarship child, the family's pride, was falling apart over a boy. So she said, "I'm fine," in the bright voice she'd practiced. And her mother said, "That's my girl." And Esther went back to her room and sat in the quiet. The scholarship letter arrived on a Wednesday. "Regret to inform you, GPA below required threshold, discontinued with effect from." She read it 3 times, then folded it very carefully, the way you fold something you don't want to be real. Placed it inside her Bible, not from faith, just from habit, just because it was the closest book, and lay down on her bed fully clothed and didn't get up for 6 hours. That night, she called Daniel. He didn't pick up. She called again. Voicemail. She called 8 more times across 2 hours, and somewhere after the 10th call, she became aware of what she was doing and felt something hot and humiliating crawl up her neck. But she was past the point of caring about dignity. She needed to hear his voice. She needed something to hold on to. She needed the person who had promised to choose her to just please pick up the phone. 14 calls total. 14 times the line rang and folded into silence. He was awake. He saw every single call. He was with Erica, and he turned his phone face down on the nightstand, and he waited for the screen to go dark, and then he went back to whatever they were watching, and he did not call back. The next morning, he sent her a text that said, "Sorry, I was knocked out. Call you later?" And she stared at it for a long time, and typed back, "Okay," and the word sat there between them like a grave. He never called back. Later, again, became never. It was a Saturday afternoon in April when Esther saw the photo, and she wasn't even looking for it. She was scrolling through Instagram the way you scroll when you're not really looking for anything, just running from your own thoughts, when the algorithm, in its infinite and terrible efficiency, decided that what she needed to see right now was a post from someone she didn't follow, shared by someone who had commented on it, featuring two people at some kind of industry gala in Lagos, smiling the easy smile of people who are comfortable together, who have been comfortable together for long enough that it shows. She almost kept scrolling. Then she saw the shirt. Navy blue, with the small white geometric pattern along the collar. She'd bought it at the market in Ojolegba for 3,500 naira on an afternoon she'd spent 2 weeks saving for, because he'd mentioned in passing that he needed something nice for a formal event, and she'd wanted so badly to be someone who showed up for him in the small ways. And she'd shipped it to him in Lagos, and he sent a voice note saying, "Hey, you're going to spoil me," with that warm laugh that she'd replayed 100 times. That shit. That exact shit. She didn't cry immediately, which surprised her. She expected the bottom to fall out all at once, the way dramatic things happen in films. But instead, she just went very still, the way water goes still right before it freezes. And she looked at the photo for a very long time. Erica Oyelara, the caption tag said. She clicked the profile, because of course she did. And Erica's page opened, warm lighting, beautiful photos, a life that looked curated and full and completely legitimate. A woman who had no idea she'd been handed a man who already belonged to someone else. And for one disorienting second, Esther felt something almost like sympathy for her. And then the sympathy cuddled into something too hot and complicated to name. She went back to the photo. She stared at the shirt. She stared at the shirt for a long time. Then she opened her chat with Daniel, and she typed slowly and carefully, with the steadiness of someone who has gone to the other side of something and is now speaking from there. "I saw the photo. You could have just told me." She pressed send. The 2 gray ticks turned blue immediately. He had read it. He was online. She could see it online. And she watched the screen, and she waited, and she waited. And the typing indicator never appeared. And after 7 minutes, the green dot next to his name disappeared, and he was gone. And the message sat there read and unanswered, like the most honest thing he'd ever communicated. She put her phone down. She picked it up again. She put it down. He never replied. Not that day. Not the next. Not ever. He just went back to his life and left her message there like a receipt. She dropped out for a semester, which she told her parents was a medical leave, which was technically true in the ways that the soul is part of the body. And her parents, who had trusted her to manage herself, were devastated in the quiet way Nigerian parents get devastated when their children fall in ways they don't fully understand. Her father didn't shout. He just got very quiet. Her mother called every morning for 3 weeks, and every morning Esther answered, and they talked about nothing important. And her mother always ended the call the same way. "You know we're here, Adiaze. You know we're here." And every time, Esther said, "Yes, Mommy," in that practiced bright voice, and then sat in the silence after the call, and wished she knew how to let people actually reach her. Meanwhile, Daniel, because this story insists on being honest about how the world works, Daniel was fine. Better than fine. He and Erica moved into a flat together in Yaba, the kind of flat with a generator and an actual living room, and a kitchen that had cabinet doors that matched. And he posted a photo of the unpacked boxes and his new bookcase with the caption, "New chapter, new energy, God's plan is always better than yours." And Esther, who still had him on Instagram because she couldn't bring herself to unfollow, saw it. She saw all of it. The gym selfies, the restaurant outings, the career update about a project he was leading at work, the New Year post where Erica was tagged and the caption was, "Grateful for the one who makes it all make sense." And every single post landed like a specific, targeted, personalized punishment. He was not suffering. He was not even struggling. He was thriving openly in the middle of everything he had done, and the world was just letting him. Her roommate, a new one, someone who didn't know her history, once said, "Why do you always look so sad when you're on your phone?" And Esther said, "I'm not sad." And she closed Instagram and opened it again the moment her roommate turned away. And she hated herself for it, but she couldn't stop, because sometimes grief keeps its own addictions. Esther came back to school in September. She repeated some of her courses, rebuilt her GPA with the grinding, joyless discipline of someone who has nothing left to lose, reconnected with a few acquaintances who didn't know enough about her year to ask the wrong questions. And by November, she had something that looked from the outside like stability. Inside, she was still that girl on the staircase, counting the minutes on the wall. But she was functioning, and in the mathematics of survival, functioning is enormous. She had started, somewhere in the middle of all of it, talking to her phone, which she knew sounded alarming, but which was not what it sounds like. She would record voice notes to herself, processing out loud, the way her mother used to talk to her plants, just needing to give the inside thing a voice. One night in late November, she recorded one that started as a personal note and became something else entirely. She talked about the scholarship, about her father's quiet face, about the 14 missed calls, about the shirt, about the way she'd spent a year trying to become someone that Daniel might have chosen, cutting her hair differently and changing the way she dressed and laughing louder at things that weren't funny, performing a version of herself that she thought might be more deserving. And somewhere in the middle of describing it, she heard herself and stopped. "Oh," she thought in the silence of her own room. "Oh, this is what it's been." She sat there for a long time with that, with the specific awful tenderness of finally seeing clearly something you'd been avoiding seeing. And then she cried. Not the loud, urgent crying of fresh pain, but the quiet, exhausted crying of someone releasing something they've been holding for too long. She felt afterwards emptied out in a way that was almost peaceful. She wasn't healed, she wasn't even close, but she was different, and different sometimes is the only door available. Then, on the 17th of December at 1:47 in the morning, her phone rang. An unknown number, which she would normally ignore at that hour, but something made her pick it up, some pull she couldn't explain, the way you sometimes act against your own logic because a deeper part of you has already decided. "Hello?" she said, her voice rough with half-sleep. Silence. Then, and this is where I need you to breathe, then, through the static, a voice said her name. "Esther." And the world stopped because it was Daniel's voice. She was certain of it. She would know that voice in any room, in any darkness, in any language. But something about it was wrong, slightly off, like hearing a familiar song played in the wrong key, close but not quite landing. "Daniel?" she whispered. Static. Then, "I'm sorry, S. I'm so sorry." The line went dead. She sat there in the dark of her room, her phone still pressed to her ear, her heart doing something she didn't have a name for. Unknown number. She called it back, straight to some automated message, the kind that means the line doesn't fully exist. She checked her recent calls because she needed to confirm she hadn't imagined it, and there it was, 1 minute 40 seconds, 1:47 a.m. She told herself it was a wrong number, a look-alike voice, the trick that 4 a.m. plays on a tired and grief-worn mind. She told herself this every night for the next 2 weeks. Then, Chidima, who had been carefully distant for months and was now cautiously trying to find her way back to Esther, mentioned something in passing, the way terrible news always arrives in passing, as if it's afraid to knock directly. "Did you hear about Daniel?" Chidima said, looking at her plate. "What about him?" Esther said in the careful voice. Chidima looked up. "There was an accident on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway in November. It was in his lodge mate's car, some kind of tire blowout, they said." She paused and then said, quietly, "He didn't make it, Esther. He died." November 17th, 1:47 in the morning, 2 weeks before she got the news, the same night the phone rang. They say grief is not linear, which is something people say because it's true and because there's genuinely nothing more useful to say. Because how do you hold the weight of losing someone who hurts you? How do you mourn a person you are still angry at? How do you stand at the graveside of a love story that ended badly and figure out which of your feelings is the appropriate one? Esther felt all of them, in no particular order. Grief and fury and pity and love and something that was almost relief and then guilt for the relief. And she felt them the way you feel a storm. Not one weather system, but several, overlapping, simultaneous, indifferent to your need for them to arrive in a manageable sequence. She didn't go to his burial. She couldn't explain why, and she didn't try to. She just sat in the knowledge of it. The calls started coming in the new year. Always late, always unknown numbers, always that specific quality of static that felt like distance, not geographical distance, something further than that. And always the same few words, fragmented and soft, as if spoken through water or wind or the space between one place and another. Eh, I'm here. I'm trying to tell you something. Please don't. And then silence, every time. She went to see a pastor who told her to pray and stay away from the expressway. She went to see a counselor who was a kind woman who nodded well and said the calls were her mind's way of processing an unresolved grief and gave her exercises to do. She did the exercises and the calls continued, and she kept that to herself. Her mother came to visit in February and noticed what nobody else had thought to look at directly, the specific flatness behind her daughter's eyes. Not depression exactly, more like a woman who had been having a long conversation with something nobody else could see and was beginning to not fully be in the room anymore. Adazi, her mother said that evening, sitting across from her at the campus guest house dinner table, tell me the truth. And Esther, for the first time since everything started, opened her mouth to tell the truth, but what came out was, I'm just tired, Mommy. And her mother looked at her for a very long moment and said, tired of what exactly? And Esther didn't answer. She didn't answer because if she answered honestly, she would have had to say, tired of being here. And she wasn't ready for what came after that sentence. The last call came on the 22nd of March at 2 a.m. Clearer than any of the others. No static this time, just his voice. And it sounded like him, fully like him, the warmth and the familiar cadence. And he said, Esther, you have to let me go. And she gripped the phone and said, I can't. And he said quietly, you have to stay. And she said, stay for what, Daniel? Stay for what? And her voice broke on it, cracked completely open. You took everything with you when you left. You took it before you even died. You took it and you never came back. And I'm so tired of being the only one left holding this. I know, he said. I know, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, But you have to stay. The line held for one more second. Then it went dead. She sat there until 4 a.m. Then she got dressed, not for any reason she could have articulated, just the way a body moves sometimes ahead of the mind's permission. And she walked out of her hostel, and she walked through the quiet pre-dawn campus, and she walked past the fellowship ground where the mango tree still stood, and she kept walking, past the gate, down the road, through the junction, toward the expressway. She didn't know entirely why she was going there, or perhaps she did know in the part of herself she'd been keeping the counselor away from. The expressway was still and grey in the early morning light, the lanes mostly empty, one or two trucks cutting through the darkness, and she stood at the edge of it and felt the wind from the road and looked down the long stretch of tarmac and thought about 17th of November, about a tire blowout somewhere along this same road, about a man who loved her and then didn't, and then tried from wherever he now was to send her back. Stay, he'd said. You have to stay. She was at the edge of the road, one truck in the distance, headlights cutting through. Her phone rang. She almost didn't look at it. Then she did. Unknown number, but when she picked it up, it wasn't static, it wasn't Daniel. It was a voice she recognized after a confused second as Chidinma's cousin, a girl who'd borrowed her number months ago, calling from a new line, panicked, saying, Esther, is that you? Thank God. Chidinma collapsed at home an hour ago. She's at the hospital. She keeps asking for you. She keeps asking for you. The truck passed. Wind hit her face. Stay. She turned away from the expressway. She turned away and she called back and she said, "Tell her I'm coming." And she walked back the way she'd come. One step and then another, the grey dawn beginning to lighten, the mango tree visible in the distance like a marker, like a landmark, like something that had been waiting to see which way she would go. She went. She went back. And 3 months later, sitting in the campus clinic waiting room while Chidinma was recovering from what turned out to be a combination of anemia and exhaustion, Esther wrote in her journal for the first time in over a year, not about Daniel, not about the scholarship, not about the phone calls, but just, "Today I chose to stay." She stared at the words for a very long time, then she wrote beneath them, "Tomorrow I'll try again." Daniel Chukwuemeka Eze never got to become the man he should have been, and that is its own kind of tragedy because people are not only the worst things they ever do, and he was both the boy under the mango tree who meant every word and the man in Lagos who turned his phone face down. And grief, unlike anger, has to hold all of that at once. Esther Adaze Okafor went back to school the following semester. She did not fully recover quickly because recovery is not a straight road and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. But she stayed and she kept staying, and on some mornings that was enough. But here's the thing about oats. The night before she submitted her final comeback exam, she heard his voice one last time, not through a phone, not through static, just there in the air of her room, barely a whisper, and it said only 4 words, "I'm proud of you." And she didn't know if it was real. She didn't know if any of the calls were real, but she pressed her pen to her answer booklet the next morning and she wrote, and she chose, and she stayed. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear this story. Also like and subscribe for more stories.